Our chief global correspondent, Bill Neely, is live, thankfully for me, in Tel Aviv in this very, very early hour there. The panel is still with me as well. But, Bill, let me start with you. Bibi Netanyahu, is he going to be the leader of the Likud party a month from now?
That's a good question, and I asked that to the former mayor of Jerusalem. Are you prepared to knife your party leader in the back? Needless to say, he said no, but there are mutterings within Likud that could be one possible way forward. As you said, 95% of the votes already cast. It is actually, in terms of the blocks, they can command a tie at 56 each. So, in fact, they both fall short of that magic 61 number needed to form the majority. But I think, Chuck, for the first time in 10 years, we can see a way in which the era of Netanyahu is over. He's certainly closer to losing power than ever before. But look, don't write his political obituary just yet. As one canny voter said to me, Benjamin Netanyahu is the cat with 9 lives, and he's already used 17.
Let me ask you this, Bill. He's obviously one of the things that hovers over his head is this investigation. Is that part of could that become part of the negotiation? Could immunity in exchange for leaving Likud? I know that everything is on the table when you're forming governments. Is that where this could end up heading? Now, maybe he thinks he could still win, but could that be where this goes next?
I think the problem for him, Chuck, and remember, it's a problem that is coming up fast. October 2nd, he is due in court for that pre-trial hearing on 3 counts of corruption, fraud and bribery. I think the problem is he's in such a weakened position now. I mean, where are his bargaining chips to give him the kind of immunity from prosecution that he needs to stay out of jail? And of course, this is the issue. It's not just his job that's at stake. It's his personal freedom. So, you know, the world may now just be closing in on Bibi Netanyahu.
Let me do a quick political fallout here domestically. The president, Matthew, has made his personal bond with Netanyahu a political asset to him in many ways. But he clearly weighed in on one side of this. Ideologically, there's little difference between Bibi and Gantz. But how quickly can he repair that relationship?
I think pretty quickly, as President Trump said today, the relationship is with Israel, not with any particular leader. So
I'm surprised he said that.
For several reasons, mainly domestic ones, that relationship is very important to President Trump.
Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's like he before was super close to Netanyahu. Today he said that he was no longer, that the relationship was Israel, because he also realizes that for his reelection, he needs the folks here to make sure that he is with that country.
Here's the thing. It's in Gantz's best interest to also make nice with President Trump, because look what he said on Golan Heights. Look what he said. Some things that Gantz wants to keep.
I think any Israeli prime minister, whoever it may be, is going to want to have a close relationship with the United States for obvious reasons. The alliance and the United Nations aid to Israel regardless. I just want to say 5 elections Israel has had in the last decade, including 2 in the last 6 months. A lot of Americans look at that parliamentary system and say, maybe it'd be nice to have that because things actually get done. There's less gridlock. But this is remarkable.
Bill, it was really... I knew that Benjamin Netanyahu thought he was losing when he announced last night that he would be the only one that could form a Zionist government, implying that if you form a majority government with Arab parties, you're doing a disservice to the country. Is there an appetite for that kind of politics still?
I think the, frankly, racist politics that he's been chasing during this election has not gone down well. I mean, that may well have cost him many votes, and the Arab parties are delighted at his discomfort. In fact, there could be a scenario, Chuck, which is extraordinary, that if there was a national unity government, the Arab parties could be Israel's main opposition, and their leader could get security briefings. That's something that's never happened in Israel's 70-year history. So I think although Gantz is ahead at the minute, slightly, you have to say, Chuck, anything could happen here.
Well, I was just going to say, the power is Lieberman the power broker here? Not our Lieberman, but I think Iberdor Lieberman, who's basically been been the person that has saved Bibi in the past.
Yeah, he's got 9 seats. He is the kingmaker, and his voice, when Israel's president talks to the various party leaders about who would you like to see, who would you support, I think his voice will probably count more than anybody else's.
All right, Bill Neely, thank you for giving me a few extra minutes before you've had a very, very long day and a half covering a one-day story, as always, sir. Thanks very much. Very quickly here. What do you expect out of the Israeli government if Gantz is the guy? Do you expect that much different, or do you think there will be a repair relationship with Democrats?
It's important.
Do you think that all of a sudden there'll be this goodwill?
Americans have to understand that this extraordinary situation is driven by Israeli domestic politics, specifically the religious secular divide.
Yes.
In terms of foreign policy, there will be no change. If anything, Gantz may be more hawkish than Netanyahu.
Right. It will, though, provide an opportunity, I think, for a reset with congressional Democratic relations, perhaps. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.